Hey guys, welcome to Star Wars Timeline. My name is Ben. Today we're taking a look at the third episode of Season 2, The Bad Batch. As always, thank you so much for checking out my content. Please like this video, sub to the channel so you don't miss all the future reviews. As always, this will be a full spoiler on review. If you didn't see it yet, I will talk about the story, the characters, and so on. You have been warned. So, The Solitary Clone is a pretty straightforward story, but what I really enjoyed about it was all the nuance and intricate details that made it one of my favorite pieces of Star Wars in years. I was completely blown away by it, guys. And the first thing I'd like to mention is the synergy between the absolutely awe-inspiring visuals and the amazing, what I would call experimental music for a Star Wars animated show. So we open up with this beautiful, beautiful panoramic shot of planet Desix, a new location which, as far as I'm concerned, we have not seen or heard about before. And immediately there's this very oppressive and dark atmosphere. There's a lot of these orangey tints in the skyline reminding us of the Revenge of the Sith, of the planet Mustafar, very, very dark place. But at the moment, in the beginning of this episode, it is still independence, which it fiercely holds on to. And what really makes it work for me, first, the visuals that kind of paint a picture that is a very storied place. There's a lot of history to it, and even though it's not narrated to us, it's visually there and makes you wonder what kind of place this was, what kind of separatist planet this was years before. And once again, it is fully described and brought to life by this amazing score, which further paints this picture of a very dark, dystopian place. I'm checking out a lot of Warhammer 40k lore videos currently, and it sort of reminded me of that, which is very, very appropriate for a war-themed show. Now, story-wise, we're 1 year after Season 1, and we're reintroduced to our villain, Crosshair, and he's completely alone there. And once again, I thought it was a very, very effective episode to bring him back. This was appropriately done to completely dedicated episode to him. It's just to see what he's going through. And, you know, I really enjoyed how the Solitary Clone title of this episode works in both ways, and I'll explain why. First, he's sitting there by himself, and he's overhearing these two clones talking about the defense recruitment bill, which basically we understand as audience that the clones are being circled out of the military now, and there are going to be these new Imperial recruits, which are arguably far less trained or motivated than the cloners were. But then later in this episode, Vice Admiral Rampart calls the Crosshair and he says, look, I'm going to give you a new mission. I can't trust you with command anymore, so you're going to follow orders now. And Commander Cody, our old war dog, is once again reintroduced as well. But I thought to myself, hold on a second, the Solitary Clone, who is the plot going to focus on primarily? Is this episode truly going to be about Crosshair, the familiar, what we've known before, or is it going to create this interesting contrast between him and Commander Cody and make the audience ask the question, who is the Solitary Clone here? Who is the one hero of the episode who is doing his thing and we're supposed to follow them? So that was quite an interesting dilemma. I usually don't like to jump ahead of myself in the story, so I was just waiting to see where it's going to go. On one hand, you have this Crosshair who isolates himself from the rest of his group or from his family. They basically abandoned him in the first season. They actually asked him to come over, but he basically exiles himself and he says, no, I'm going to stick to my own creed. And even though he's not well spoken, he doesn't say a lot of lines in this episode, but you kind of sort of feel these boiling emotions inside of him and this inner turmoil that is just waiting to explode. And I think it's going to culminate in something very, very special at the end of the season. On the other hand, you have this Commander Cody, who is a very clean cut, and he can separate the good from the bad. And he says, look, every man has a choice, and he has to pay with the consequences for his choices. And once again, I felt it was such an interesting contrast, and it also felt very nostalgic because we're back to the Clone War material, not just with the Commander Cody, but later on with the droids that they actually battle. So it was a very, very interesting callback there. And the next thing that I wanted to talk about is So in Wisconsin, there's a famous memorial called the Freedom Wall, which commemorates the sacrifice of 416,000 American servicemen who fought and died in World War II. And obviously, when we see that huge mural wall in the episode where, Commander Cody and Crosshair, they're conversating with one another, but in the background, there's this huge wall with Arabic language, which I immediately started kind of interpreting that scene as those are all the call numbers of all the clones that sacrificed themselves in the Clone Wars. And it hit home, man. It was so emotional, so dark. I couldn't believe how incredibly oppressive this was for a family-oriented show. After all, this is what Star Wars is supposed to be. It is wars. It's not a pretty picture, and it doesn't glorify war. I was like, oh man, it's so emotional, so deep, and let's see where it goes. And they give you these visual cues. Let's face it, guys. As Star Wars fans, we tend to overanalyze sometimes, and we try to add symbolism where it's not even called for. But here, I felt that this particular episode, Dave Filoni and the crew, they were very deliberate with their choices of what's going to be actually in the shot, in the foreground, in the background. So it was immaculately done. I really enjoyed this kind of attention to detail, and that harkens back something that we can see a parallel to in the real world history. And, it makes you ask the question, so what is really the price of freedom? Is it something that noble clones that fought for shoulder to shoulder and they sacrificed their lives for it? Or is the price of freedom going to be somebody like Crosshair who thinks, no, it's just we follow commands, we follow orders? And another comparison you can make to that is the actual droids that you see, the separatist droids in the rest of the episode, that's going to be the price of freedom when actual soldiers with actual men descend into these mindless droids who follow Empire's every whim. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. There's a lot of content here without just too much exposition scenes or dialogue happening. And that's expertly telling a story. I couldn't tell you guys how happy I was with it. The next thing I wanted to talk about is actually the action. Hands down, my favorite Star Wars animated show episode as far as action is concerned. Not because it was mind-blowingly innovative. I mean, we've seen firefighters before in Star Wars. It's just, once again, this attention to detail, the cinematography, the angles they show, that everything was just immaculate, that the music just builds this tension, this rousing, action. You're rooting for these guys for a second. And first we see, obviously, the ship that carries our clone troopers. It crash lands in Desik City. And then the fight initiates, and we see them trying to infiltrate the city, and these droids all over the place. And once we get, I'm thrown back to the Clone Wars show. I'm like, oh man, the droids! I'm so happy to see them, and just how tactical, Tom Clancy-ish that infiltration was. How they're all backing each other up. They're looking, checking their corners. They're hiding behind the cover. Oh man, it was just sweetness all across the the thing. It was just beautiful to look at. And when we see Crosshair and Commander Cody standing shoulder to shoulder, and in the background that smoldering, fiery, the ship that was crash landed. For a second there, I thought, oh man, it's the old gang. They're there, man. They're just gonna whoop so much ass. I was so excited there. But once again, I toned down my emotions because as the episode progresses, you understand they're nothing alike. This is not two war buddies like, yeah, man, it's gonna be all happy, good old times again. Because they're completely two different personas there. One fights for what he believes is good, and another one is he's broken. There's no other way I can describe Crosshair. He's just broken. And that sweet hallways / staircase scene, guys, it's something I would compare to the Daredevil Marvel show, or if you will, the Rogue One's Darth Vader hallway scene. Now I'm so happy that we have our own hallway scene in the Bad Batch. And man, with the Crosshair's sniping skills are OP, completely overboard. But no matter how over the top it is, they still sold it pretty well. Because at the end of the day, it's all entertainment. It's not meant to be realistic. He flips that coin with whatever that thing is with reflective surface, and he's sniping it, and he's killing his droids. Oh man, it was just so beautiful. And when Commander Cody takes out his vibro knife and just starts hacking away at the droids, I couldn't help but reminisce on my expanded universe, right? The Star Wars novels, which were written before Disney took over, the Legends books, and, you know, characters like Cal Skirata, who was a Mandalorian who was responsible for training clone commandos. And of course, Goran Bevin, and obviously Jango Fett, characters that Karen Travis has created for her Mandalorian and Clone War books. Man, I couldn't help but vibe with that. I was like, oh man, he's fighting with that Vibro's knife. That is so badass. And once again, it makes that conscious or subconscious connection to expanded material that existed before Disney. And I really appreciate it. I really love how Dave Filoni and the team are playing with these elements there and give us a taste of something different and something new, but also harkening back to something that existed before. So on the action front, this episode just completely blew my mind. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the climax of this episode, this very heartbreaking ending, because we see a contrast between how the clones operate, how they were loyal to one another, and they fought, once again, shoulder to shoulder, you know, securing peace in the Republic, what they were grown from childhood to do, but they still kind of started self-identifying and calling each other names and calling each other brothers, and you kind of rooted for them throughout the entire Clone Wars show. Versus the Empire. In the previous episode, right, episode 2, we see Vice Admiral Rampart just shoot. He's cleaning his mess and he shoots one of his own straight in the chest, which was just completely... I had paused there. I couldn't believe what I saw in a family-friendly show. And on top of that, we have this Governor Groton. The second that he's liberated, he says, shoot her. You know, they do what I tell you. I am the Empire now. We're not going to negotiate with terrorists or whoever, with all these people. This planet is now under our control, and shoot her. And where Cody is pausing there for a second, and he knows that's not the right thing to do because he was actually negotiating for peace, Crosshair has no deliberations there. He shoots her right in the chest. And once again, it shows you the methodology of the Empire, that there is backstabbing and violence, hell-bent kind of like rulership. And it was just so tragic for me, and I really enjoyed how this episode ended. So, all in all, this is a 4 out of 4 episode for me. It's completely excellent stuff. And if this is just episode 3, I can't wait to see what happens by the time we get to the season finale. So it had excellent reintroduction of Crosshair and obviously Commander Cody. I hope they do something more with him. It was absolutely mind-blowing cinematography with very nuanced and detailed shots and like camera angles and zooming and phasing things out. Just beautiful. The special effects, the blaster bolts, everything was just on point. And also the visual storytelling, that mural wall that I guys told you about, that you don't have to necessarily instantly recognize what it is, but it sort of makes your mind going and ask the question, hey, what is this? Maybe I can go and research. Maybe I could ask other fans and check out a YouTube video there. What's going on there? There's obviously things put in the background and the foreground of the images to kind of activate your mind and make you think about just beyond what is being said by characters on screen. And obviously the action, the storytelling, and the music work in complete synergy here. If you're the type of Star Wars fan who likes something which is more story or dialogue driven like Andor show, you have it here because you have pretty strong dialogues as well. If you're the type of Star Wars fan who enjoys primarily action, you just want things blazing and things exploding, and you don't like the slower, more boring episodes where just talk, you have that as well. It brings everything together. If you're the sort of fans who is there on Spotify all day long checking out Star Wars, favorite, musical pieces, it has absolutely fantastic music. And it shows you, it's a living proof of how you can have everything in one single episode that just works to perfection. As always, guys, thank you so much for checking out my content. I would love to hear your thoughts, what you thought about this episode. Maybe you're the type of fan who didn't quite enjoy season 1 as much, but after this particular episode, you are on board, you were sold, and you can't wait to see what else is going to happen with our heroes. Thanks for checking out this video, guys. Please consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.